Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read part of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. And in this part, he tells us the reasons that the British, thought that Mohammed Abdullah Hassan started the war on the British. Douglas Jardine was, of course, a British official. He was like maybe second or third in command in Berbera, and he served in that office between 1916 and 1921. And this book was published in early 1920s. It's a sort of biography of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan. Now, the British, of course, were trying to understand why Mohammed Abdullah Hassan decided to fight them. Of course, they needed to do that. But the reasons they came up with, or after maybe analyzing everything, the reasons that Douglas Jardine provides are very interesting. And they are interesting because it seems like he was trying so hard to avoid bringing up the genuine grievances that Mohammed Abdullah Hassan likely had, or which clearly must have had, and that is that his people were not comfortable being ruled over by people who came from elsewhere. And that is the story of Africa, actually. It's the story of, we can say, all Africans. And the way he tries to avoid the core issue is just the way they try to avoid the core issue everywhere, even in Kenya during the Mau Mau War. Of course, when you read documents from that period, they tried so much to avoid the talk of these people wanted to rule themselves, wanted to be in charge of their own affairs. These people were not comfortable being treated as second or third class or even fourth class citizens on their own land. They avoided talking of that, and they could come up with these other stories. For example, the Mau Mau. I read a document where the British say that the issue of the Mau Mau was brought about by outsiders who were trying to teach the Africans communism. And they say that this was part of the global rise of communism, which of course then made the genuine grievances of the people not to be discussed. And it was not about the people having genuine grievances. It was just these people were being misled by the force of communism that was spreading around the world. That's what they said about the Mau Mau. Now, is something similar when it comes to what they thought were the reasons why Mohammed Abdullah Hassan rose up to fight them in Somaliland, or British Somaliland. Now, let's read this part. And this is what he says. The Mullah apparently attributed the lack of success which attended his religious mission to the political conditions existing in Somaliland. So he's basically saying in this part that Mohammed Abdullah Hassan started preaching in Berbera especially, and his argument is he was not successful in his mission of preaching, and Mohammed Abdullah Hassan thought that he was not successful in his preaching because of the British, or the presence of the British as colonizers on the land. So he basically makes it so cheap. He tries to make it seem like this was an uprising that was fueled by bruised ego of an individual who wanted to spread his religious beliefs, and then he could not succeed there, and then he decided to look for something to blame, and he arrived at the conclusion that the British were to blame. He came to the conclusion that in order to achieve his religious object, it was necessary to add a political plank to his platform, namely the substitution of his temporal authority for that of the tribal leaders and their infidel overlord. Yeah, so that's his argument at this point. He persuaded himself that allegiance to non-Mohammedan power was a definite barrier to the religious progress of his fellow countrymen, and that the irksome doctrines of Muhammad Ali could only be imposed upon the skeptical tribesmen by fire and sword, a course to which an infidel, a pacific government, will inevitably take the strongest exception. Now, this is very interesting, and I've always told you that the choice of words is very important. Like always, you need to be very careful to recognize how words are used in arguments. And of course, he avoids talking about the grievances, and he's trying to look for other reasons that made Mohammed Abdullah Hassan to start fighting the British. And of course, as I've said, his conclusion is that Mohammed Abdullah Hassan tried to preach. He was not successful in his preaching. He decides that the reason why he was not successful in his preaching is because there were these people who were ruling over the people, and they were making it difficult. And he uses the word pacific government, which means he wanted to use force to convert, but there was this peaceful government, or a government that was trying to maintain peace and order, that was standing in the way. That's why he uses the word pacific government. So trying to show that the British were the good guys and they were on the good side, and this guy was on the, we can say, even evil side. He had evil intents, but those intents were being stopped by the British. That's what he makes it out to be. And he continues, once established as the temporal head of all the Somalis, he argued by methods of which he was the diabolical master. Choice of words again, diabolical master. By methods of which he was the diabolical. Find little difficulty in counter instituting himself their spiritual leader to guide them aright in the path of true religion and virtue. Such was the nature of the motive which induced him to raise the flag of political revolt. So, according to Douglas Jardine, it wasn't the political issues were not genuine issues. That's basically what he's saying. That they were just an excuse to something else, to religious, we can say the religious mission, which is a very interesting way to describe the issues. And I've said this was not unique to what the British did in Somaliland. This was something that was repeated in so many other places, where the people rise up and try to claim their right to manage their own affairs and not have somebody from elsewhere manage them on their behalf, and maybe not liking being treated as second or third or even fourth class citizens on their own land. Those are genuine concerns, you'll think, but he thinks those are not, and this guy is not genuine in his fight, because he's just using political issues as an excuse, that he doesn't really believe that the Somalis need to have a right to determine their own matters. That's basically what he's arguing. Now, as far as what motivated the people to support him, he also has a very weird theory, actually, very weird theory. And he basically argues that the people who followed him did not genuinely follow him because they believed in what he believed. I can even say this is very evil way of describing people, because he's basically saying these people did not think of themselves in a highly way such that they will be like, you know what, we are going to follow someone who says that we deserve to control our own affairs, which I can bet was the case. That there are, of course, maybe there were terrible things that happened. Of course, we cannot ignore that maybe even Mohammed Abdullah Hassan's sides did do some things that maybe today would be like, maybe that should not have happened. But we cannot, I think there's no way you can argue that there are people who followed him did not believe in what he told them, or did not believe in the mission and the vision of the movement, and that is, we need these people out of our land so that we are able to manage our own affairs. There's no way you can argue against that, just like you cannot argue that, we might argue that the Mau Mau fighters in Kenya did do some things that will be like, maybe they should not have done those, but they were in a state of war, and they might have done things that you might have disapproved, especially during a peaceful moment. You are living in a peaceful period. You might look at those actions and you'll be like, those are not acceptable actions. But it would be very disingenuous to argue that the Mau Mau fighters did not actually believe in the mission of the leaders of the movement, and that is independence and freedom. It will be so disingenuous to argue like that. But that's what Douglas Jardine does, actually says. So few were the followers whom religion or politics attracted to the Mullah standard. We must look elsewhere for the motive which inspired the majority of his following. And we find it in the personal interest of the people. You can see the words. I don't want to use those words because those words put me in trouble in another video. Now, he's basically arguing that the people did not follow him because they believed in the mission and the vision. It's because they had their own interests, material interest of all. And he says, intertribal fighting and raiding constitute the Somali national sport, and life devoted to other tribes. You can read for yourself. Indiscriminate and do not but seem irresistible to indigent, especially when, yeah, so you can read for yourself those lines. I've realized that some of these lines might put the video in jeopardy. Yeah, so basically he's arguing that these people did not believe in the vision and mission, which is absurd, actually. Very, very absurd, because there's no way you can sit there and actually come to that conclusion. You can't, but he had to make it look that way, because I think maybe he knew what he was doing. I think he knew. It seems like he was a very smart guy. He did not rise up to that rank. He was someone who was not very smart. I think he joined other British officers to try to support this narrative, to hold it. Remember, this is 1920s when this book is published. So we are not talking like it is maybe after independence, when he would have been forced to at least provide a more objective view of things. He still needed to prop that narrative at this point, and that's what he's doing. Those are my random thoughts.